To those watching from afar, nice to have you with us this morning. We do, of course, switch off our mobile phones, please, so that we can all be fully present. Thank you. So, apologies, please. Do we have apologies? Yes, thank you.
Yes, excuse me, Madam Chair. A apology for Ms. Marks. She is sick, so cannot attend.
Thank you. Yes, Your Worship.
Just a notification that I'll be leaving at 11:45.
11:45, right. Thank you. So we do have one apologies for Ms. Marks. I have a mover and a seconder, please, that we receive the apology. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you, Councillor McPherson. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Any declarations of interest today? Thank you, Mr. Berryman-Kemp.
Yes, Madam Chair. As Chair of Kiwi Health, I have a conflict of interest regarding the confidential agenda item. Therefore, I suggest that I remove myself from that portion of the meeting.
Thank you. Yes, you did last time, and I'm happy for that. So noted. Thank you. Any items, urgent items that are not on the agenda? Thank you. Yes, thank you, Councillor McPherson.
Thank you very much. Yesterday, I think we all got a letter from Jared Adams, a formal complaint about the non-enforcement of the Reserves Act. Is it possible to call for a report or have a brief briefing that would attend to that issue? Thank you.
Thank you. It's not an urgent item, and I will give you an opportunity if you would like to. It's not an urgent item. I think we all got that email. It's we have had an update in our housing strategy, which I think encompasses some of those campers, etc. So I'll let you, but certainly it's not an urgent item, and it won't be dealt with at our meeting today.
No, certainly. Through the chair. So there was an update, as you'll recall. Is it on? Sorry, my apologies. So through the chair this time. So you'll recall at the end of the last O&M meeting that there was an update on the strategy, which is a wide encompassing strategy, looking at our area of houses and homes and the locations where people are currently sleeping and so on. Now that's something that the Mayor has also been following up on recent times, and so there really isn't anything further to update following that at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Thank you. Moving on. Thank you. Confirmation of minutes. Agenda item number 4. The minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting held on the 13th of February 2020. May I ask for a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you, Mrs. Trumper. Thank you, Councillor Wang. So it's been moved and seconded. First of all, of course, are there any corrections, additions? No. So I'll put that motion. All those in favour of our minutes being true and correct, all those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. So we're up to our first presentation this morning, actually the only presentation this morning. Kia ora. Thank you. And the Child Equity Program, this is the update on the pilot program. Morena Korua.
Morena. Thank you for the opportunity to present this report. The Child Equity Program is something which arose...
excuse me, Rosemary, because I think that we've got new councillors, and please use your microphone. It might be good if you could just introduce yourselves so that everybody knows who you are. Thank you.
Kia ora. So I'm Rosemary Viskovich. I'm the Strategy Development Manager in the strategy team, looking after social development and sustainability. So one of the areas in relation to that is the Child Equity Program. So this arose out of a strategy visit to some other colleagues in Lower Hutt, looking at some work they'd done in their lower socioeconomic communities, and the things that we brought back from that around how we could look at our own services and look at taking an equity lens to how we deliver our services, and how we also work in collaboration to maximise the outcomes for a community with high needs. So Jill's been the person in our team who's been actively on the ground doing that, so she's here to share with you today how that's gone and the expectations going forward.
Morning, Jill.
Morena. Thank you, Madam Chair. Kia ora, everyone. My name is Jill Campbell. I'm a strategy advisor within Rosemary's team, and I have been tasked with leading the child equity work on behalf of Council. So basically, this morning I'm going to take you through the results of the pilot that we ran in 2019 and where we're going to from there.
Can I just ask before you start, how long do you anticipate your presentation? I believe it will be, 15 minutes?
Hopefully 10.
Oh, excellent, thank you.
All right. So as I'm sure you'll remember, when we had looked at the induction process for our council, we had spoke about our complex problems. And as part of that, looking at our statistics for our tamariki. So 49% of Rotorua's birth to 9-year-olds live in areas of highest deprivation 9-10. So point blank, you don't get poorer than 9-10. And so that leads you to question basic needs being met and what are the other fallouts that come from those statistics. So 3 out of 5 tamariki living in poverty stay there for life. There are barriers for those tamariki, aside from basic needs around food and housing. It's also looking at the other barriers to participation. So those tamariki very often are not playing sport, they're not doing school holiday programs, they're not participating in other things that can help them thrive because there's no additional funds to make that happen. The majority of those tamariki are Maori. And so these statistics are our own, and these statistics are also national. So looking at 3 and 5 tamariki living in poverty stay there for life, we started to look at how do we interrupt the poverty cycle? What can we as local government be doing? And with the introduction or the reintroduction of the well-beings, kind of allowed us to start pushing that agenda forward to go, what is our role? And what can we be doing in Rotorua to interrupt that cycle? So we looked at what was happening nationally. We looked at research that was coming out of the Office for the Children's Commissioner. We looked at things that were happening internationally. And we started to look at the Rotorua way and how we could be, as our council, what we could be doing to put a program together. So we co-designed a program with Sunset Primary School in Fordlands. And through your induction process, we discussed why that community and that school had been selected. And again, the goal was to improve access for those tamariki to access council facilities and programs, as well as sport, other extracurricular opportunities, or other opportunities in general. The other thing was around involving and engaging the community and the private sector around how we could improve outcomes for these tamariki. I think it's worth noting as well that as part of this process, we reviewed council services for children. So we did a stock take of library, aquatic center, museum services, and looked at some of the barriers that might impede children participating in our free programs. So an example being that we have a Making a Difference swim program that's externally funded. It's partnered with the local swim club. And one of the barriers, so that program is funded by RECT and Bay Trust, and tamariki are provided 5 free swim lessons and transport is included. But some of our schools, including Sunset, were not participating in that program. And when we dug into the rationale as to why, the barrier was because those tamariki didn't have togs, and if they didn't have bathing suits and towels, they weren't able to participate in the program. So that's an easy fix, but sometimes it's just around having those conversations. So we looked at our various council departments, again, library, museum, other departments, as well as infrastructure who provide our sustainable transport. We looked at partners that we have partnership agreements with and just long-standing relationships with. So Tuairiki Puria Trust, Rotorua Youth Development Trust, who run the Graham Dingle programs locally, Big Brothers Big Sisters Rotorua, and Fordlands Community Association, who are the representatives for the community that those tamariki are coming from. So throughout the year, we have worked together on providing a variety of programs and services. And what we'll do this morning is just walk you through what some of those programs have been. But just to, I guess, say from the onset that the principal of the school, Steve and I met with him 2 days ago. He has had just fabulous things to say about the program and the partnership, and also saying that there was no way he was going to be able to achieve the things that he did in 1 year without this program. And I don't want to just say it's just a partnership with council, because it has been a partnership with the community as well. But there have been some really great things that we'll walk through. So placemakers came to Rotorua last year to provide their national conference. As part of their national conference, they organize a community day where they go into a community and they will give their time free of charge. They had made contact with our parks team, because initially they were looking at a wetlands planting day or something like that. Our parks team have been involved in the child equity program. They said, actually, let me get you in touch with Eden, the principal of Sunset Primary School, and we'll look to do a working bee at the school. So placemakers not only donated a bunch of sport equipment, but they came in and gave their dedicated time and expertise in fixing up the school, and put about $30,000 into upgrades into infrastructure around the place, as well as marakai that was around the community gardens in the school. Experiences, so I use the example of the Making a Difference swim program, the school access set. So that's your years 4, 5, and 6s going to the aquatic center. The year before, the school had paid for buses to take the tamariki to the pool. Their teachers were instructing the kids on the side of the pool. So really about accessing things that already exist, so that the tamariki are benefiting. We had Steve from our team. I know he did a wonderful presentation last year around the Kotahi Plus One program, where he was able to fundraise a substantial amount of money to ensure decile 1, 2, and 3 schools got to the Māori All Blacks game. So along with Sunset Primary School participating in that, the difference was the school asked for whānau passes rather than individual tickets to tamariki. When they go home to their whānau, it doesn't mean that the whole whānau can afford to go. So these tickets were all funded and sponsored. Whānau passes were given to the tamariki at Sunset School, and their whole whānau went to that game. Alongside that, though, they participated in a school holiday program that was happening at that time. The Māori All Blacks came and visited those tamariki, so they had an opportunity to meet these really aspiring Māori sports people. Now, that beautiful photo of the young man on the bottom is a young guy who's done quite well in the Rotorua Primary School chess competition. And the reason I have that photo there, one, is because he's beautiful, and two, for the fact that he and that program probably could not have happened without the support of the Rotorua Trust. So initially, one of the learnings from this experience has been, initially council went to REC to say, would you come on board and support us with running the child equity program? And Rotorua Trust turned around and said, no, we want the school to apply. And that's been a wonderful outcome. So the school applied, and they got a substantial amount of money for a co-curricular coordinator. And there were 3 programs happening at Sunset Primary School prior to the child equity program. Now they have a plethora of programs happening. Chess is one of them. But this sport, co-curricular sport activities, he does everything. He takes the tamariki from school, takes them to the competitions, he takes them to sport, he takes them to all these opportunities, he takes them to mini ball on Friday night. Those barriers to participation are taken away, and so these tamariki are having opportunities that didn't exist before. So talking again about experiences, so the research that we have tells us that this is what we as council can be doing. One is we can be supporting play, and we can be looking at improved access, taking those barriers a way to ensure that there are equitable outcomes and equitable access for tamariki living in poverty. So the museum has their Aquabots program. Sunset participated in that program, but also they had two classes participate rather than one. We ran a career fair at the school. So the tamariki went around and met firemen and lawyers and OGO and all various departments of council. So we had 5-year-olds to 11-year-olds go around meeting different people with various careers, just as an introduction to get them to dream. And I'll talk about that in some of the evaluation stuff. We have partnered with Kiwi Can, which is part of the Graham Dingle Foundation programs. But Megan Kusabs, who runs that, is also a trained ukulele instructor. So she has donated her time to run a ukulele orchestra alongside the school. So they now have a music program, which did not exist. We were able to get the ukuleles that came out of the Children's Art House when that program closed. We utilized those resources. The school now has ukuleles. They have a ukulele instructor. And that beautiful photo is 10 tamariki who went to Auckland to participate in a national ukulele day. And their team was called the Ukulukkies. Now, for a number of those tamariki, they had never been to Auckland. So there are some pretty cool opportunities for the kids that are participating. Now, the other picture there of the young girl holding the cake is with one of our staff, so Vernay Mullen, who has been one of our Big Brothers, Big Sisters mentors in schools, Big Sisters. So what we've been able to do is, thankfully, our leadership has supported council staff participating as mentors through that program, and Sunset Primary School is our partner. So we have 7 of our staff that go in and mentor 7 tamariki once a week, and it could be a variety of things, but there is some amazing one-on-one opportunities for those tamariki to have a mentor, to have someone special for them. During the summer, it had been identified that for a lot of our tamariki during January especially, funds are particularly low, and there are a number of tamariki that are in the community and they weren't really doing much. You have to remember that a lot of these tamariki are not going to the forest, they are not going to the lake, and so what could we bring into that community? So we had probably 10 organizations. You can see the police, Hone from the Fordlands Community Association. We had a number of partners come around the table. All those bikes are from Council's bike trailer. And we had some children who arrived not knowing how to ride a bike, and after those 3 weeks, they could. And so really cool opportunity to just bring things into the community, have whānau show up, bring their tamariki, and whānau did show up. There was free food. Everybody came to the party, made it happen on the smell of an oily rag. So really cool that the kids had some fun things to do, and whānau had some fun things to look forward to during that month. So I guess one of the biggest visual outcomes that you'll see from this program is around the play space, the improved play facilities at the school. And again, I think that's part of the expertise of council because we are experts in play spaces. So initially we looked at what could we do to bring a Bikes in Schools program into the school. So Bikes in Schools is actually funded through the Bike On Trust. And so we started having initial conversations with them, with our infrastructure team. We went into the school, our parks team, and we looked at how could we bring a Bikes in Schools program to Sunset Primary School. And part of that was around asking the tamariki themselves around what did they want? Did they even want it? And if they did, what kind of things would they like to see in that space? And these are the results. So initially, you'll see, initially at the beginning of 2019, they had brown grass on their field. They have one play space for 5 and 6 year olds, and that was it. So we supported the school, and Eden, the new principal at the time, was very focused on improved play space as well. But we now have a marked field. we have uprights. And he was able to get a substantial amount of funding to create an amazing play space in the school that is very social. There are all kinds of well-being and social components that go to that. But alongside that was leveraging council's investment and knowledge and expertise again, and looking at that paved bike track. So really cool space. Dave was able to come during the opening and have a ride with those tamariki, but none of this existed prior to this program. So if you had been able to see the now and then photos, massive changes. So looking at the evaluation in this program, we ran an evaluation alongside the pilot to establish a baseline to see if we're able to make change. But again, there is no expectation that we're going to have residing change in 1 year. Again, it's just looking at where are things at the moment and having a long-term approach to that evaluation. So year one was around establishing baseline. The tool that we used was around measuring children's resilience and engagement, and also considering the effectiveness of interagency collaboration, of how those organizations, including council, work together. Some of the learnings just off the top would be the equity focus has definitely increased access. So we have a list in our evaluation of all the experiences and things that the tamariki have participated in over the year that they hadn't previously. Partnering with schools is effective. So using the school as a vehicle to access the tamariki is useful, rather than trying to run a few different pocket projects. We're able to have a lot more influence with a greater number of tamariki. And looking at strengthening the value of experiences. So there's all kinds of things you can do with those experiences. They can be a one-off, they can be a long-term. So looking at, for example, the career fair, well, that's 1 day. The music in the school was over the year. So that you can vary the different experiences and also allow the children to pick and choose the things that they are interested in or want to grow and develop. But aside from that, so experiences for tamariki, one of the interesting things has been Eden, the principal, has just gotten his ARROW report back from the Ministry of Education, and there is significant improvement from their previous report. Eden has also identified that 90% of students had attended the first day of school versus maybe 60 in previous years. So there are a few things going on. That tamariki have an amazing play space. They also have school lunches. The school has also provided their stationery. So again, working collaboratively to ensure those barriers are taken away so tamariki get full access to education and all the fun things that can go along with that at school. Stakeholder collaboration. So what we've learned from that is that there is a genuine willingness to collaborate around child equity and looking at how do we get involved and how do we change the impacts of child poverty. There has been real, I suppose, council as a facilitator. This wasn't happening without council at that table. And really, my role at the table has been the orchestrator, pulling things in. I'm not running new programs. I'm getting existing programs and pulling them in to the school and to those tamariki who need the most. Shared focus increases access. So looking at how we as a stakeholder group can be improving access for tamariki. Funder interest, we definitely have funder interest looking at what we're doing and looking at how they potentially could be funding things in a different way to improve access. And looking at supporting change within council departments. So we have had amazing response from our own council departments, and it can be just simple things. So, for example, the Rats Duathlon was on, I think, 2 days ago, and Erin from he is involved in the bike education stuff, brought the trailer of bikes down to the event so a number of tamariki who did not own bikes could go and participate in that event. We have those resources. That's a simple fix. So recommendations from our evaluation moving forward was that there is value in continuing to develop the program, opportunities to deepen the collaboration with private and public and community organizations, looking at how those groups working together could strategize on a range of experiences, making connections for other collaborative work, and looking at how we can build a database. So just making sure we're reflecting and building on what we're already doing, and promoting council services. So identifying how equity of access can be developed and letting some of those schools or organizations know what we are doing. So an example might be the mobile library service is going into some of our early childhood centers and some of our schools. Sometimes we need to promote what we're doing a little bit more, or just have some one-on-one conversations with those schools most in need. So moving forward, we have approached a few Decile 1 and 2 schools. The other schools that are participating in the 2020 program, we have Sunset on board again, Aorangi School, which is in Western Heights, Malfoy School, Kongaroa Forest School, and Selwyn Primary School. And there's lots of rationale as to why we're working with those schools and the communities of need that they represent. But we have met as a stakeholder group, and we're moving forward with running our programs for 2020.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's really exciting to hear that. I don't think there was anybody who was sitting at the table last year who didn't support it when it was presented, but just to see the value now that you've clearly articulated from that program. So it's been a wonderful opportunity. And I think that one of the scary things is when you said at the start that 3 out of 5 children will remain in that state of deprivation throughout their lives. So when we wonder why we see people sitting in the park, smoking there, whatever they're doing and all of that sort of thing, if they don't move out of deprivation, that is the end result. So I'm absolutely so supportive of this. And when I look at the other schools, knowing the areas that those schools are in, I'm just so pleased that they'll be taking part in the equity program this year. So I know there are a number of, Your Worship, I'll start with you. Thank you.
I just want to say congratulations. This equity matters to us as a core service, actually, as a council. And without your support as council officers, this wouldn't have happened either, because it takes that leadership to actually get out there and network, knowing the bits of our community that need to be pulled together. So thank you, especially Jill. I saw you operate on Monday with the principal. There were some other aspects to this that I saw that were of great interest, and that was the school lunches.
Yeah.
That made the children come to school. And what a wholesome lunch it was being prepared. I've heard some criticism that it mightn't be healthy, but I saw an incredibly healthy lunch being delivered. And then another string, when we get out there, was seeing the need for some child health support. And so discussing whether it was the GP network or whānau ora. And we worked out just there and then who it should be. And so Jill makes that contact. So this is an iterative process. I can see it changing, just as these other schools have come in saying we want to be part of it too, because it's so valuable. That was one of the most rewarding days I've had in my mayoralty, because I saw the difference that we're making at the grassroots level. And I really do support that we continue with these approaches, which are very targeted. And I was very proud of this council for this project. I do hope it's entered in the local government New Zealand awards, because this is one that I want spread nationally.
Thank you. Councillor Wang, then Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Rosemary and Jill, for the presentation. I think we all really appreciate it. It's great to also see Kangaroa Forest School included in that as well. So our rural, I don't want to take this away from Shirley, but our rural schools are included in this as well. I think it's really heartwarming to see that the work that you guys are doing in collaboration with other entities as well. And like I think, that you've mentioned, these children, they probably wouldn't have been out of the Bay of Plenty, let alone travelling across the country or to other countries out of New Zealand. And to give them these opportunities, to give them these choices, it's really invaluable to them. It really plants that seed in their minds that they have this bright future ahead of them. That they have these choices. They can become, like you said, a fireman, a firefighter, a police officer, a lawyer, and all these opportunities out there for them. So it really is. It's a great program. Thank you so much for your report.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Jill. Great program, and well done. One tiny aspect of it that you mentioned was the opening of the child play space facilities, and the sense I got attending along with Councillor Yates to the opening was the immense sense of pride that the pupils and the staff had in their new space, the refreshed space, and I think that's borne out by what you raised in the drop in truancy that they've experienced at that school. That's a huge gain for that community and for those kids. What I think you omitted to mention is the school makes that space available outside school hours for the community to access, which is also, I think, an important point. So well done. Kia ora.
By Mr. Thomas and then Councillor Yates.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and once again I'd like to add my congratulations. I know when we were discussing this at the beginning we were very excited about it, and it's fantastic to see that all those goals you were looking to achieve are coming through. Rosemary, most probably know what I'm going to say. It's fantastic to see this going into our urban schools and into Kangaroa Forest, but I'd also love to see if we can work with our schools out at Rotorua and Rotorua, especially for those extracurricular activities. It's an area that is low decile. There is no public transport, so I see our kids out there missing out on sporting opportunities, training opportunities, and all those sorts of things. I know there are challenges there. They're small schools, one's Te Reo, but I do hope in the future we can work with them as well. Thank you.
Councillor Yates.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, ladies. You know how long I've been waiting for to see this come to fruition, which it certainly has. The ripple effect for me is that obviously it will impact our rangatahi, which is another area that we have a grave concern around here in Rotorua, and then potentially moving on to adults. So one of the things that I'd like to just sort of see whether or not it's been scoped, because admittedly this is a child equity program, but it is around the literacy of our whānau, because coupled with equity for our children is also what does that look like in home, and there are some fantastic literacy programs happening here in Rotorua that are free for our whānau as well. So just a possibility of whether or not that could be also looked into as, or scoped at least, to have that whole wraparound for our whānau. But wonderful to see an extension of the schools, and as you know, I know a number of schools that could be up there too, but hey, we've started and it's been hugely successful. I see it out in our Fordlands community. I feel it when I drive through there now. There is a change, and it's a change for the betterment. So thank you once again.
Thank you. I am going to allow sufficient time for everyone to make a comment on this, because there's a number of councillors, because this is actually part of our community that never see themselves as participating. So I really think it's all very well for councillors, for many of us to sit here, we're doing okay, our families are doing okay, There are hundreds of young children in our city that are not doing okay. So we're here for all of our community. So I just want to make sure that, so everyone, I'm so pleased you're wanting to have a say. Mr. Berryman Kemp and then Councillor McPherson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and yes, thank you. And just to talk all the words thus far, what I wanted to do was just add a couple of things just to provide a wee bit of context and go through. And actually, at the start of this year, at the start of 2019, I did a stint as interim chair of the Sunset School Board. So to provide some context there, what I've observed through this is transformative change through a collaboration of focus. And why I say that is that there are a number of drivers that came together at the same point, and to a degree you need this sort of thing as the glue to hold the whole thing together. And for the benefit of those around the table, this program came into place at the same time of a board election, so change of governance. What was really quite nice was actually previously the school has struggled to get parent trustees. Last year they managed to attract not only a parent trustee but a Māori male trustee, and that's important from a role modelling perspective. So you get a change of principle, change of governance, this program coming in, some significant investment from a range of players that has resulted in things like the school being repainted, the new playground coming in, a fence being put up, because interestingly, one of the photos that you showed of the bike day, the previous experience for some of those tamariki of police on school grounds was police tracking offenders through school grounds. And the tamariki saw that. Their recent experience now is of police riding bikes with them in a fun day. So that role modelling and everything else, it really does move to these points that the chair raised, that through transformative change, we can change their worldview, change the access that they've got, and then hopefully it's spread around that whole community. And maybe the last thing I just wanted to touch on was you also had the Food in Schools project come in, but the principal was extremely clear that had to be for all students within the school, because when that program was originally rolled out, it was going to be targeted. The issue with that is what you're trying to do is build a community, not seek out individuals. So those are all key components of this, which I think have resulted in the outcomes that you've raised, and certainly support this in the future too.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you very much, through you, Chair. I endorse much of what my colleagues have said, and I won't repeat, but Rosemary and Jill, thank you very much. Comprehensive report. I'd like to make a suggestion, and please don't take this the wrong way. You're very clear with regard to this, this program's purposes about interrupting the poverty cycle, the replication of poverty intergenerationally. You're clear on needs and on barriers, resources, partners, priorities and activities and so on. That stuff strikes me as an educator extremely sensible indeed. As a researcher, can I suggest that it might be helpful to look again at the evaluation criteria and processes that you use, because in a sense we've got to evaluate the comparative value of this program against the other programs. Do you mind? Sorry, let me go back to that argument. We have to evaluate the comparative value of this program, because it's being expanded out to 5 from one program, the comparative value of this program against all the other worthy programs vying for money and in the LTP context. So the key question here would be, to what extent the evaluation criteria give us coherence between the purposes of this program to interrupt the poverty cycle and the measures, the baseline measures that you're using on resilience, engagement and collaboration. So I'm not entirely sure that the measures of resilience, engagement and collaboration are comprehensive enough to longitudinally demonstrate the value of this program, which is, as everybody's picked up, is becoming quite apparent. So it's really a technical matter of methodology. But again, thank you both very much for this report.
Thank you. That's an observation, so may care to take that on board. Thank you. Councillor Maxwell and Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yep, ditto to what everyone has said, except Aroha Councillor McPherson. I didn't understand where you're coming from. Aroha. But for me, Jill, thank you. You're our council face out there as our facilitator. And starting with Sunset Primary, really, Fordlands, I think that was terrific, tremendous starting there. And just a couple of comments, Madam Chair, before I really ask a question. I heard you say that ERO gave a very good report, significant improvements in that there. That rings really good things with me, and the enriching experiences that you gave them. And the trip to Auckland, all that, yeah, it'll open their eyes. Going to the question is bringing in the role models like you brought in the Maori All Blacks, perhaps the Warriors and various things, that really is a big help to youngsters and that there. The question is, what other opportunities have you, do you think are there or are looking at for the youngsters this coming year, 2020?
Madam Chair, can I respond? Thank you.
Thank you.
So looking at, we're having conversations with each school around what they feel their gaps are or the needs are. We are continuing the Big Brothers Big Sisters in Schools program. The issue with that, so the mentors in schools obviously needs mentors. And the mentors are required during work time as well for many people. And so to have a number of other Big Brothers, Big Sisters in those schools, then we as an organization would like to challenge some of our partnering organizations to say, can you get on board? So, you know, as an example with the DHB, or, you know, it could be one of our timber companies, to see what we could be doing to get some really, that relationship side of things, and having access to a mentor, someone that gives you some one-on-one time, that cares about you. If there are things going on at home that may not be great, it is those sport coaches, it is those other people that become those role models for aspiration. And so that is, there's no question that's an area that we need to grow, but it's on the radar.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tapsell and then Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. And thank you very much, Jill and Rosemary, for the benefits that you've provided through your hard work, and also the trust and connection with the community, because I know that a program like this doesn't kick off unless those schools and the key influencers in those communities trust you. So I thank you very much. This sends a strong message that children in Rotorua are deserving of every chance and opportunity to participate in community activities, and it's the collaborative approach that has made this so successful, because it's not just about benefiting the schools and the students, but about benefiting communities and their wider families. Because when we look at the communities that these schools come from, it's not just about the schools. Sunset didn't have a playground around that area. Kaingaroa doesn't have a single playground in that entire community. So the benefits that these bring to these communities, I'm just so grateful, and I know that those communities will be grateful too. And I do support Mr. Thomas in extending these into the wider Rotorua and Lakes communities, particularly around our Lakes communities as well, and the equity of access to our council facilities that for some of them are 1 hour away. I did have a question on whether there were thoughts of having a longitudinal study in this, because the benefits are really hard to measure short term, because yes, they had a great time, but is this actually going to benefit in the long term? I believe it will, but that may be an option to look at it and study it over the next 5 to 10 years of where those children end up, because I believe that these are the sorts of opportunities that we provide that aren't just a free handout or a fun day, but it's about creating opportunities and access to resources where anyone who is willing to turn up and work hard can thrive. So thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you. Councillor Kumar and then Mrs. Trumper.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through the Chair. Thank you, Rosemary and Jill, for your report. I think I've from sitting over here, I've heard a lot of superlatives of this program, and I have a couple of things to say. I think around the country, Christchurch announced not so long ago that they too, as a city council, are doing something in the equity program. So they've planted lots of fruit trees in strategic places around the city, so that families can, for their personal use, go over, so no kids can go hungry. It just gives them an opportunity, the families that can't afford it. And so that was a good program around this line. The other thing that I want to talk about is, and so I'm not being negative, is that I think it's what fellow Councillor Tanya's talked about as well. Mine is that when we scope this out, what is the cost of this program, and how are we continuously going to keep running this? Although we've had a measure by Aero to tell us that, hey, look, this is good and the attendance high, everything at certain point of junction in life comes over and it just plateaus. So how are we going to continuously put money into a program and really know what the outcome is? Shall we say, let's measure it in 3 years' time and say, are we growing? Is this program going further, or has it starting to decline? I mean, how do we measure this? We want this to be a very successful program. It is initial at the pilot stage. Does it become the norm and not go anywhere? That's what I think, you know. And how are we going to roll it out on the fringes in the future? The schools, other schools in that are just barely in the top 5, but probably need that support as well.
Those are all very good questions, and I'll let you attempt to answer that. Thank you.
Thank you. That is a really good question. The first year we've had the privilege of working with one school and community, and the co-design process with them, identifying what their needs are, what their barriers and interests are, and pulling the partners in to support that. The challenge this year is extending the extent of impact into other school communities, and I mean, there are so many communities of need, and we do, this is just the second year. And I think the challenge this year is how do we actually apply what we've learned and scale up to greater areas? How do we make sure we have enough other partners on board coming around each of those schools? And I guess Council's role as a facilitator, how do we also grow that ability among other people to help this program be able to actually be scaled up? And I think that's a key learning this year is how do we scale up? Because you know we do just have one staff member who's responsible from our perspective, and we can't do everything. But I think it's the learning is around how we will impart some of that knowledge around facilitation into other people in the community, and just extend the ability and capacity of the wider communities.
Have another question?
No, just wanted to add to it. Thank you. And thank you for your answer, Rosemary. Just wanted to add something that the chairperson had mentioned earlier, and that was that most of us are quite privileged. But in that privilege, what we do understand is that even though when we come here to meetings, we have good breakfast at home and all, but we still get morning tea over here. But we have a cuppa, we have something to eat, just so that we are refreshed. But when these kids get food at school, it makes them think. You go to school on a hungry stomach, it probably decapitates your ability to activate yourself. And I think some of these kids, when they see others with food and them not, and I think this is where this program is very good, that they can have breakfast, that they can have some lunch, and hot lunch too.
Actually, it's probably even more fundamental than that, Councillor Guma, and it really is that somebody, and I'm not saying that the school hasn't done it, but somebody actually believes that they've got more potential, and actually allowing them to have access. When we talk about equity, and we always think that everybody gets off the starting blocks at the same time with the same resources. Well, actually they don't. These children don't have bikes, they don't have togs, they never get out to the lake in the summer. When it's boiling hot and everybody's heading to the lake, they can't go. They're living in homes where there's little or no income, where there's possibly overcrowding. All of these things that most of us in this room don't have to cope with daily. Their families live in Struggle Street daily, and they do the best that they can. And heaven forbid that we don't at some stage think about having an equity program for parents. so that they start to move their lives along. But you did ask a question there, and I'd like it to be answered more fully, if you don't mind, Jeff, and it really is around the cost of the program, because I look at it as an investment, but that's something that I think we might need some more clarification on, if you don't mind.
Yes, through the chair. Look, if I can clarify, the previous council saw child equity as a priority area and effectively directed the council look to undertake a program which was actually about facilitating the delivery of support options and services to young people who otherwise wouldn't get them. So the primary cost of this has actually all been about staff time. The direct cost to council has been approximately $10,000, which is quite minimal when you look at the outcomes of this program. The real investment from the council perspective has actually, as I say, been staff time. And the question back to you at some point, not necessarily today, is always the one of, if this continues to be a priority, then our response is always about minimising the direct cost involved, but nevertheless facilitating the support and provisions of services and the coordination of those services in a way which achieves an outcome that without that facilitation this simply wouldn't happen. And that's been the primary role that you've heard presented to you today.
Yes, and I suspect we don't ever sit around the table and evaluate the social return on the investment for our $10,000. Because if we did that exercise, then the true return would then become apparent.
If I can again comment on that, the question of evaluation is always a vexed one, in that to systematically evaluate a program such as this through an external piece of research, the cost of doing that would far exceed the cost of actually the program itself, and that's always a challenge. Having said that, what I know the team has actually done is to nevertheless bring together the information which are indicators as to this program making a difference or not. And you've heard made mention some of those indicators, such as the independent report conducted by the Education Review Office. And that's a very good indicator, in my view, as to the impacts of this program. We are also, though, in constant communication with researchers in this area, and I understand that Rosemary has actually just recently had a discussion with a researcher who's based at the DHB, with the potential around the partnership with the DHB of looking at the question of how do we get better information and metrics from the interventions that as an organisation that we're providing. But of course, always the caution here is that we've got to be careful with research, and that fundamentally we need to balance off an exhaustive evaluation of programs against the cost of that evaluation. And quite easily we can well exceed the cost of the program by the cost of the research, and that's always the balance that we're constantly having to achieve.
Thank you, Jeff. And Mrs. Trumper.
Thank you, Jill and Rosemary. One of the things that I had was the value of the program rather than the cost. Everybody's got cost and time because that's, just natural, but it's the value. And it reminds me of a program called Child of Our Time. And that Child of Our Time was done over 20 years of study of where those children started to where they became adults. And I think this is, regardless of where we start today, it's where they will be in 20 years' time. And no one can sit at a table today and say we need to measure X, Y, and Z, because every year will be a learning. There will be no way that we can sit here except look at the amazing results that we're getting through attendance at school. And from attendance at school, they will learn their reading. They will learn life. And it will be a good part of life. The other thing is that I'm the instigator of the word pilot, and I will take that back now. I will apologise profusely to say that it is definitely an equity child program, and I think that we need to drop the word pilot. That's long gone, because it's here now, and I think we can build on what we have already started. Obviously, I'm ecstatic that Kaingaroa is being brought in this year, and I know that Mary Louise has some exciting programs, and the growth of the school roll from when she first arrived at 23, there is now 67 children, and I think that that is just an example of her skill and desire to drive. The other thing was, Eugene mentioned the police at Sunset. At the 30th anniversary of Kaingaroa a couple of years ago, the children were able to get a ride in the police car, and I can assure you the driver was going exceedingly fast, and there was grins from ear to ear that they actually got into the back of a car with a policeman and they went in cuffs, and the kids were so excited. And I think the police, as a team leader in our community, this is what they are wanting to do, is work with our tamariki, and it's something that, looking at the photos, seeing them at Kaingaroa that day, it was an exciting partnership. So keep up the good work, and thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Trumper, and well, thank you everybody for your comments this morning, and thank you for the work that you've done, Rosemary and Jill, in this area. And really, as you say, our job was the facilitation, the coordination, and then others came on board. And obviously your skills in being able to facilitate the big piece of work that you've done. There's no doubt that principals talk, and they will be able to, they would have, I'm sure, shared with other principals. The principal of this school, Sunset, would have shared with other principals what has happened, over this period of time since the pilot's been in place. And the fact that the success, I believe, also was the fact that the program was co-designed. It was co-designed by the school, by some of the parents, the input from some of the parents, and the children as well. So that's, when you co-design any program, you're more likely to stay the distance because you've had an input into it right from the outset. It hasn't been delivered. Here it is, have I got a deal for you? This is part of their contribution right from the start. And they identified the areas, some of them known and obviously others not known, about where they could participate and grow through that. So I think that's very good. It'd be nice to think that over a period of time, one school would adopt another school so that they could say, this was how we started. So let them take a hand in actually supporting it and spreading it and cascading it and getting it out there into the community. I do want to say that the evaluation really should be done from the children's perspective. I mean, I know we have other forms of evaluation that you're incorporating into that as well, but the difference that it makes to the children, because that was the objective of the program right from the outset, and they in turn go into their homes. The saddest thing, of course, is always they go back into a home environment that might not be as conducive to their growth as their opportunity for them through participating in the programs. But nevertheless, this is a very, very good start. And, when we talk about homelessness, when we talk about we're seeing our people in Quito Park and everything, if we don't move the children out of these homes, not in terms of move them out, but in terms of the deprivation and the poverty in which they're living, then that is actually where many of them will end up. So it's very important that we show our children that we do care, and we care not only now where they are starting from, but where they will eventually be able to move to be fully contributing citizens of our country, their country, that they have a right to participate in. I want to mention something that happened yesterday, Mrs. Trumper, because a number of people around the table have talked about the police and the police involvement. I was yesterday in a cafe and there was a mother ordering her coffee with a little child. 3 police officers came in and stood behind waiting. The child turned around, saw the 3 police officers and screamed and hugged his mother's thighs. And she turned around and tried to pacify her child. I don't know what that child's experience has ever been with police, but those of us in the cafe, just looked and could not believe the reaction of this child when he saw a police officer, or 3 police officers, and they were big lads. And so, so this is, when we're talking about, we've got to have wider involvement, and the more that we can get the wider involvement for those people that should be respected in our community, and they are there, because that was a very sobering sight to see yesterday in our community. A little child, I suppose it would be about 5 or 6, and the mother tried to pacify him, but I noticed she was moving a little further away from them as well. So I'm just saying, the program is great, but we've got some big issues in our community, and we're doing the best we can to address them. So thank you very much for your presentation this morning. Kia ora, thank you. So, staff reports. This is the recommendation, the adoption of dangerous, affected and insanitary building policy. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please, that report be received? Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. All those in favour of the report being received, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried. That's now Daryl. Good morning, Daryl. Thank you. You're going to do the overview of the report. Thank you.
Morena, just by way of an introduction, kia ora everyone. My name's Gerald Holder. I'm the Manager of Building Services, so our responsibilities here within Council are to administer the Building Act, and this is where this bit of this policy comes from. So our responsibilities downstairs are to issue building consents, inspect building work, issue compliance certificates, and we also administer the regular inspections of buildings with a warrant of fitness and swimming pools, as well as our compliance role, which is dealing with the likes of the dangerous and insanitary buildings and building complaints. We also one of the only departments in council that run a quality system that's required by the legislation, where we have to have accreditation as a building consent authority to be able to function. So that's a requirement of the Building Act. So quite a complex bit of legislation, but effectively the report before you today, we ran prior to the election last year, went through without any suggested changes, and we've completed the consultation post-election, just so that it didn't get mixed up and lost in that process. So we've had no submissions on the policy as it was put to council back in August, I think it was last year. So happy to take any questions on that, but effectively it's I'd like to move that it's taken as read.
Thank you, Daryl. Thank you. I would have thought that we might have got some submissions, but we received nothing at all.
No, Madam Chair. So look, and I guess it's not unheard of, because the policy requirement has been with us since 2006. So I've had 2 previous versions of the policy. So this is just
so there was really no substantive changes as such?
No, we've taken out some of the tools at the back of the policy so that we can manage that within our quality system, rather than having to have a policy change every time we want to tweak something. So that was just a more... And we've aligned it with the legislation changed to take into account effective buildings. So what they found in Christchurch was they had buildings that were perfectly fine to occupy, except the buildings beside them created a risk. Yes. So that's where the affected section of the policy comes into that, so that you can look after people in that respect. So yeah, every 5 years the policy has to be renewed or reviewed as part of the Building Act requirements. So again, there's not a substantive change, and people are just probably aware of, of what it's there to do.
Thank you. Mr. Berryman Kemp, then Mr. Thomas.
Fantastic, Madam Chair. Actually, I was going to ask something, but I haven't put my hand up, but perfect timing. So just to cap off, I recall some quite significant discussion about this in SPNF prior to August of last year, and I know we discussed particularly impact on buildings used for community use, community halls, rural halls, marae in particular. But I think a lot of our questions were addressed at that point. And the one thing that I wanted to outline is my take on why there may have been an absence of submissions, is that actually this is about ensuring that our buildings are safe, and quite difficult for people to argue against. So I'm quite comfortable with the pathway.
Thomas?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. Look, just a quick question, and it most probably revolves around the definition of building. And I'm just wondering about, does this apply to removable dwellings, so people living in caravans, the little rooms you can rent that get brought out on a trailer and stuff? We have quite a lot of those out in our lakes areas and some of our communities. I'd hate to see us in a situation, as other councils are, we're insisting on building permits necessarily for tiny houses and that sort of stuff. But I think we do still have an obligation to make sure that those dwellings are sanitary and safe for people who may be living in them. So I just wondered, does this cover those sorts of occupancies?
Through you, Madam Chair. This is a bit of a moving target, the small buildings and things, and there's been a recent determination by the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment that was overturned. So they decreed that there's some of these buildings that look, some of these structures on wheels look more like buildings because they had all the attributes of buildings and they weren't designed for transporting people or materials. The courts have actually overruled MB's determination. So effectively, if it's movable and not occupied on a long-term basis, they're not buildings. So some of them still fall through the cracks as such. So lots of caravans and things, for it to be classed as a building, has to be occupied on a long-term basis and be immovable. So effectively, you don't have a lot of powers on those types of temporary accommodation.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick follow-up. I guess my main concern in the areas I represent around the lakes relates back to caravans. We do have a number of people living in those, and quite often they're not in a healthy state, especially around dampness and those sorts of issues. So, yeah, I guess that's why I raised the question, and I think we do still have an issue or potential issue with those sorts of dwellings that do tend to get used long term in the end, just because of homeless issues and all those sorts of things as well. Thank you.
The issue is about affordability of good homes. So you do see structures that you think, my God, somebody's living in that. So, but if they have no alternative, they're either out on the street or that's where they're living, and that's the reality. Mr. McPherson, Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Daryl, Jocelyn. Thank you both. This is a report that I didn't really expect to be entertained by, but the deeper I got into it, the more fascinating it became. In 2.2, there's a statement: the council has endeavoured to strike a balance between the threats posed by dangerous and unsanitary buildings and the broader social and economic issues affecting the community. The significance of that statement didn't strike me until later, when I got to, on page 15, section 123, the definition of unsanitary. It includes a definition that does not have sanitary facilities that are adequate for its intended use. With this changing social and economic context, and given the public use of the buildings the council owns and so on, it struck me straight away that it's time perhaps for us to consider the use of sanitary hand sanitisers in a context of coronavirus. So I support all aspects of the proposed changes to the policy, but I can see an immediate application of it. You might care to comment on that or not. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think, thank you, you've made your point there. So I'm going to move on to the next speaker. Councillor Donaldson, then your worship.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Daryl. The report talks about notifications of dangerous or unsanitary buildings that you have to assess. And I know you do your own assessments through building and water fitness checks. There's private operators in the field. There's also been a change to the government's tolerance level for meth contamination in buildings, is my understanding. So can you tell me how notifications or assessments are tracking? Are you getting more? Are you getting less? How are we tracking in that area, please?
Through you, Madam Chair. Look, on any given year, we might issue 2 or 3 of these notices. In the unusual event of the unfortunate events of 2018, the floods at Ngongataha and some of the affected properties in town ended up with insanitary building notices. And that was just as a result of those one-off events. But typically we're responding to complaints from the community, of people that are living in buildings and things like that, or our own observations. So, like I say, many people won't complain about the state that they're living in because that's the only accommodation they have. So, again, it's not something that we're using on a daily basis.
Thank you, and I'm pleased that you have some understanding of the realities of some families in Rotorua in terms of their housing needs, and you're right, what they put up with, so at least they've got a roof over their head. And so we're not using any of our laws and our regulations to, hammer them over the head sort of thing. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the Chair, thank you, Daryl, for bringing this up. Quite passionate about this, especially with regards to some of the issues now that for insanitary building around that. I believe when there's an earthquake problem on a building, an earthquake issue, there's a substantial amount of time that's given to a landlord to fix it. This brings me to 4.1 on page 15, where it says the council recognizes that most dangerous and insanitary buildings, even a member of the public could. But where does the member of the public get that knowledge if he sees something? Because it's not a professional opinion. But does that indemnify that they have the ability to... my concern really reflects back on a lot of the buildings that are commercially, and then although they've got a lot of time to fix it, this does fall under that category because you could see soffits under verandas that are quite dangerous and in fact would fall under that insanitary. So that was my particular concern.
Through you, Madam Chair, just for the benefit of the council, the earthquake-prone building provisions of the Building Act are a separate item to this here. The insanitary building provisions. So we would respond to any complaint made by a member of the public. We'd go around there, do our due diligence, and if necessary, we might ask that building owners to engage someone like a structural engineer to have a look at the issues. So we're sort of generalists in that respect, or if need be, we would engage our own experts to give us that expert opinion, and then we'll act on that. So in terms of the earthquake-prone building provisions, that's a separate section under the Building Act, and those we're in the midst of doing that. We've got a further, it was 7 years to go to identify all the earthquake-prone buildings within the district. So we're doing those on a percentage basis. We're doing 10% a year, so that we don't burden the engineering fraternity around the place. So that there, yes, they have 25 years in which to fix their buildings, unless they're a priority building, which they get half that time frame. So that's from the time that they identify that they're earthquake prone. So that's a separate solution again, and they get issued with an earthquake prone building notice, which then sets those time frames, goes on the National Register, and will be attached to the building.
Thank you, Daryl. And I presume that if anyone's unsure, if they've got a question, well, your department's always open to, or approachable to say, that doesn't fall under here, or that's not relevant, or so that's good. Your Worship.
Thanks for this, Daryl. It's interesting to see that there were no submissions. This used to be a very contentious issue, so that's great. It's not anymore. But how many times have you had to use the policy to enact intervention?
2 or 3 times.
Look, like I say, in any given year, we're probably only a handful of times, 2 or 3 times in any given year, where it gets to a point where we'll always try and work with the owner to start with. This is almost a last resort.
So it's a helpful tool to have?
Yes, it is a helpful tool to have.
Thank you, Daryl, and thank you for the work that you've put into this. I'd like to now ask if I could have a mover, please. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Thank you, Councillor Yates. Thank you. That the committee recommends to Council that the dangerous, affected and insanitary building policy be adopted without change. I'll put that motion now. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried. Now we've got a resolution to exclude the public, and we do have, sorry, just let me have a quick, thank you, yes. So could I have a mover and a seconder, please, that we exclude the public? We want to consider, the reason is we want to consider a confidential report regarding a Polynesian spa admission charge increase. Councillor Donaldson, thank you. Mr. Thomas, thank you. I'll put that motion now. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. We'll take a 10-minute recess while we clear the chambers. Thank you. I'm going to do it, I think I'll do it.